Okay, so today's topic is very important. If you've done the reading, you probably already know why. It's just an example to motivate the lesson. In 2001, shortly after the CEO of Cisco published an article in Harvard Business Review talking about how great software their company had implemented to look at data from their global operations and how well the company was doing. Shortly after that article was published, Cisco was kind of embarrassed by having to write off $2.5 billion of inventory. Okay? The sales were falling, as some of you might remember. 2001, there was a recession, especially in the IT sector, caused by what they call the dot-com bubble bursting, where you had a lot of companies starting up, trying to do things online after the success of Amazon, Netflix, and other online companies. And a lot of those companies failed, which led to sort of like a recession. So in that year, when Cisco's demand fell sharply, it was not able to reduce inventories in its supply chain as the demand fell. So it was left with low sales, about 30% lower sales, and a huge stock of inventories. One of the reasons why it was not able to reduce inventories was that its supply chain had been incentivized to just produce. There was no mechanism to tie the production with the demand in their supply chain. So they ended up with a lot of extra inventory that they had to write off. Okay? The most important thing to realize here is that a lot of times we think that if everybody in the supply chain does what's best for them, that is sufficient for the whole supply chain to work well. We've already seen example that that's not true. Okay? We've already seen the bullwhip effect, for example. Right? You could have every player in the supply chain doing what's best for them, but that could lead to the bullwhip effect and lots of inefficiencies in the supply chain. Today we're going to see another reason. Then we saw another reason in echelon inventory management as well. If we said if everybody does independent inventory management, you'll end up with a lot more safety stock than you need in the supply chain, which is why we talked about echelon inventory, reorder points, echelon lead times, all of that stuff in inventory management. Okay? A third reason we're going to discuss today is that you can actually have too little inventory sometimes if everybody works independently, and how that can lead to reduced profits. So when you think of economics and you think of free markets, that market exists at one level of the supply chain. And when we talk about in free markets, an invisible hand guiding the market and all of that free market stuff, all that means is that in a free market, you will produce over long term enough for demand, but that's at one particular stage. That's not factoring in multiple stages of production and supply chain management issues that can happen. Okay, so why can we have different companies who are working for self-interest still have issues? Because when companies work together in a supply chain, there's often lack of visibility. You don't know what your supplier is doing within the company. The supplier or the manufacturer doesn't know what the retailer is doing. There could be lack of trust, which could prevent them from sharing key information, and there could be conflicting objectives. Okay. One example of conflicting objectives we already know from distribution, right? Suppliers, it's cheaper for them often to make in large batches and then ship you large batches. It is often cheaper for you to get frequent deliveries in small batches, right? You have to work with them to make that just-in-time delivery work for them as well. If you don't work with them, you have conflicting objectives between you and your supplier. Okay, so we're going to look at this example in detail, but just to give you some numbers to show you how self-interest doesn't lead to maximizing supply chain surplus, which is essentially supply chain profit. So we have a manufacturer and a retailer. It doesn't have to be a newspaper, but that's the example I'm using here because this example is also in your reading. So we have a manufacturer which produces something and sells it to the retailer for 80 cents, $0.8 each. Okay? The retailer then sells that thing for 100 cents or $1 each, which means the retailer makes 20 cents for every item the retailer sells. The manufacturer's cost is 45 cents for every item, so the manufacturer makes 35 cents per item sold, right? And if we imagine that the average demand is 150 per day, and demand can be as low as 100, as high as 200, so it's going to be optimal for the retailer to stock 120 units in inventory at the beginning of each day. Okay? How do we know that's optimal? We're going to see that later on. You can just do a simple what if analysis. What if the retailer stocks 100? No retailer is going to stock less than 100 because 100 demand is guaranteed. The lowest is 100. And no retailer is going to stock above 200 because demand never goes above 200, right? But within 100 and 200, you can try different stocking levels. Just do a what if analysis in Excel, and you'll see that the retailer's profits are maximized at an inventory level of 120. So retailer will make $22 per day. Manufacturer will make $42 per day. Total supply chain profit of $64 per day. This is if the retailer decides how much to stock based on the retailer's self-interest. However, if we look at the whole supply chain, we can increase the profits to $70 per day for the entire supply chain, $6 higher by increasing how much the retailer stocks. We can even do contracts between the retailer and manufacturer where both of these profits increase and they get closer to 70. So everybody can make more money, but if they work independently, they're not going to be able to reach the highest money they can make. Okay? Okay, so what are some signs that incentives are not properly aligned in a supply chain? You may be frustrated at your supply chain partners. They're not doing what you feel they should be doing. That's one sign. It's not, well, I mean, there's two options, right? One is they're incompetent. Two is that they are looking at a situation differently and something else works for them, which doesn't work for you. Okay? The usual case is that they are not incompetent, that their incentives or their self-interest is in something else, yours is in something else. Other examples are they're reluctant to share data with you, reluctant to participate with you, and we've seen that in the example of distributors where they felt you would just get rid of them in distribution, like the W-Up bottlery case, and then we'll see this later on when we get to supplier management, which is the last part of the course, where you have suppliers which may be reluctant to work with you as well. We're going to look at two kind of causes of this incentive misalignment, because if you have these in your head, you learn to look for these and try to fix these issues. One reason you could have two players in the supply chain not work in a synchronous fashion, kind of oppose each other, is the issue of hidden actions. So one partner does something and you don't see it, so you don't know whether they'll do that thing for you or not. Okay? The manufacturer retailer example is a classic example of that. When you put your inventory at a Best Buy or Sears or JCPenney, how do you know the retailer is doing their best to sell your stuff as a manufacturer? Okay? Now, from a retailer's perspective, retailer just wants to make the most money. So they will sell whatever way gives them the most money, right? If they have a private brand, a lot of retailers have their own private brands, right? They often have a higher margin on a private brand versus a branded product. Okay, why do you think that is true? Why does retailer have a higher margin on their private brands? Sorry?
They've got more control over it. They manufacture it themselves.
Usually retailers will not manufacture themselves. They don't have the manufacturing expertise, right? If they did, it would make sense that there's no kind of middleman. Yes, Tyler?
There's almost like that where they may not be manufacturing, but they're buying it for a cheap price, and they're not buying it, say, from Whirlpool. They're getting it like a stock they're putting like their own name on it, so they don't have to buy it again. They just buy it the once and sell it instead of buying it like basically twice.
Right. So you'll often find that Whirlpool may have some of its own factories, might also outsource some production. So they go to these manufacturers. Often these manufacturers have experience making for these big brands. So maybe they were a supplier of Whirlpool or Maytag before, or maybe they supply to Whirlpool right now, but they have excess capacity, so they can make extra washing machines for you, things like that. And often these private label brands are not making highly innovative new products. They don't have R&D expense. They just take a simple washing machine and just make that, right? Then when they go to these suppliers, because these suppliers are not have some excess capacity, they might give them a lower price. They may not require as much high quality features or extensive testing as Whirlpool and Maytag, so that's why the contractor might give them a lower price. So because of you don't make the contractor do any R&D, you're just doing an existing design anyway. Because of all of these reasons, often they can get it made for less than the cost that Whirlpool gets. Plus there's no Whirlpool or Maytag to do their markup in the middle, right? So overall you're going to have a higher margin on your private brand. So as if you are Whirlpool or Maytag, you should expect that if these retailers can sell their private brand, they would rather do that than sell your stuff. Which leads to the question, why are these branded manufactured goods even on the retail floor? Why are Whirlpool happy with Sears, Target, JCPenney selling their stuff? Because Whirlpool knows they would rather sell their private label. Retailers know they would rather sell their private label. So why does this still work out?
The consumers want the extra choices, and Whirlpool isn't going to go and start opening retail stores.
Right. So one reason that manufacturer will say to the retailer is, look, I bring in customers. There are customers who want my brand, and if I sell through you, these customers will walk into your store, make a big purchase. You have all the chance in the world to sell them additional stuff. You sell them an accessory, you sell them something else on the way, or if they come to your store, maybe they'll buy other stuff from you as well. So I am giving you these customer traffic, and plus obviously the retailer gets a margin of each sale, right? It's just they make more money on their own sales, so you make some money of the margin, plus I push all these customers to your store because people know my brand, okay? Right, so that is one reason retailers would keep it, to get those customers in, and you would kind of go through the retailer. What else do these manufacturers do to make sure they can push people into these stores so they have something to take to the retailer? Hey, we're doing this for you, Rich. Yeah, right. So we do R&D, so any latest feature is going to be in our brand. If Target said, we only have the 10-year-old washing machine technology, nobody would go to buy washing machines at Target. So the retailers also need to have the latest, greatest product to draw the customers in. And so these brands do a lot of R&D, and they have the best features in terms of quality. Even these brands would have different levels. They may have an expensive, sub-brand and a medium and so forth. And so that is another thing they do which pushes them into the retailer. A third thing they often do which pushes people to the retailer is they do a lot of advertising. So you'll see their ads on TV. Like a lot of retailers, even if there's a Target ad on TV, it will not just say this washing machine at Target, will just say Target in general or Walmart in general, right? But these brands can advertise particular products on TV and kind of have customers go to these retailers, right? So we don't give the retailer the profit margin they can get off the private brand, but we give them the volume by funneling a lot of customers their way through advertising, through R&D, making sure the products are up to date, things like that, right? So because of those actions, we know that the retailer is going to sell some of our products, not because we trust the retailer, but because we go directly to the customer. So we have features customer wants, we have advertising customer wants, things like that, after sales service, whatnot. So we know that the retailer would be willing to sell our product. Now obviously there's other ways you can do. So even if you do all that, what if you feel as a manufacturer that you push all these people through advertising into these retail stores, but once they are there, what if the sales staff just convinces you have a very slick sales staff, they can convince the customer to buy the private label, okay? So how would you ensure the retailer doesn't do that? as a manufacturer.
Things like that.
Very good point, right? So we could do other incentives instead of just saying you get this percentage of the sales price and that's it. We could do more than that, and we could say, okay, to make sure the retailer is putting in the effort, if you meet this sales target, we give you something extra. If you don't meet the sales target, you just get the percentage you sell per item. So there's ways to set up the relationship where you make sure that the retailers whose actions you can't really observe all the time does put in the actions that you want them to put in. But you have to be aware of that, and the reason you have to put in all of this is because it's a different company, we can't control them, we can't order them, we can't be there all the time, right? So whenever you have hidden actions like that, you have to think about incentives, what is in it for them, kind of role play as them, and think about will they do what I want them to do. The other thing is hidden information, so which is one party has information the other party does not have. So this would happen both ways. One is retailer to manufacturer. Retailer may know a lot more about customer demand than the manufacturer, and it can happen the other way, from a supplier to a manufacturer or a supplier to a retailer, where the supplier knows a lot about the quality, longevity of a product, and if they don't share that information, the manufacturers may be hard for them to judge the exact quality and things like that. Okay? So whenever these hidden actions, hidden information is present, there is a chance that if incentives are not aligned, the two parties will not work well properly, or one party's interest will get sacrificed. Okay? So we're going to see an example of a moral hazard. We're going to see an example of adverse selection in action. Okay. So moral hazard is when you can't observe the action of another party. This term comes from insurance, where people notice that in some situations, a lot of people who sign up for a particular extra piece of insurance, but also people who exhibited risky behavior in that sense. So people who got the full coverage on a rental car were a little bit more likely to drive carelessly than people who had no coverage on the rental car. Right? So that's the idea of a moral hazard, that the agent, the person who rents the car, or the person who is in your supply chain, does things which are not in the interest of the supply chain or your interest. Okay? So one example is from Norwalk Furniture, a make-to-order custom furniture manufacturer. They partnered up with some retailers of furniture to sell their custom furnitures, but the retailers kept pushing the stuff which was in their inventory. Which makes sense, right? Retailer wants to clear their inventory. They don't want to give you sales unless they have to. So what could Norwalk do? Well, Norwalk saves a lot of money by not having retail stores, so they have a lot of gross margin. They need to share some of that savings by not having retail stores with the retailers, so retailers get a lot of money from that sale. We saw this already in the distribution cases we did, that if you are going to work with distributors to reduce the bullwhip effect, you have to make sure they get something out of it to be able to do that. In automotive, a lot of companies will share gains, improvement gains. So Toyota, for example, used to say to its suppliers, we will help you reduce cost, improve quality, and you get to keep the gains for the first year or two. But after that, we will ask you, after 2 years, we'll ask you to reduce the price or whatever, so that we also benefit from this, because we are putting in an effort to help you improve, right? So they would send their engineers to the supplier's premises, improve the supplier's processes, improve the supplier's quality. The supplier benefits in two ways. One is, higher quality, lower cost, increase their profits. After the first year or two, when the prices are adjusted, they still benefit because they get long-term business from Toyota, right? I believe Chrysler ended up doing the same thing. There have been examples where some auto manufacturers have gone into their suppliers, looked at their data, improved their processes, but immediately asked for a lower price. And then the suppliers were not very happy, and they were like, why should we work with you if you take all the benefit, right? So in that case, supplier would not share information with you or do the joint improvement with you. Okay, now I have bought a lemon once. A lot of you, if you've bought used car, may have bought a car, which is looks very good, low mileage, but then you buy it, they end up with other problems, right? So same, I think, happens in supply chains. You don't know exactly what's gone into a product. You buy a product and you discover problems later on. Okay? So how do sellers help get over this issue? If you go to a used car dealership, some of them will now offer you like a 30-day warranty or something. So if you walk off the shelf and the car kind of stops the same day or next week, you can take it back, right? That's one way that the company can signal to the next company in the supply chain that, hey, you don't know what we do in our factory, and maybe we don't want to share that with you, but we stand behind our product, and so you can trust us that this product will work. If it doesn't work, you can return it to us. Okay? So free returns, warranty, all of these things can overcome some of these issues. Okay, let's look at two examples, two cases of where companies had these issues and how they overcame where incentives were not aligned. Owens and Minor, so this is very similar to the 3M case we did last week, where you had VARs, value-added resellers, selling to hospitals. Okay? So this is not in Canada, this is USA. Owens and Minor is like one of those VARs. They're a distributor. They get medical supplies from manufacturers, and then they give those supplies to hospitals. Okay? So they used to charge hospitals a markup on the price. So if this medical supply costs $20, you pay us 5%, 3% off the price, and we stock the inventory for you, we deliver it to you as needed. So hospitals don't have to have a lot of inventory, and they can get frequent small shipments from these distributors. What ended up happening was hospitals were also very smart. They were looking out for their self-interest. They said, if I am going to buy something worth $1,000, $2,000, $800, 5% of that is a lot of money. Why pay that to the distributor? The shipping cost from that item is less than 5% of the price. So I can just call up the manufacturer, tell them to put it in, United States Postal Service, just mail it to us, right? And the postage is less than what I pay the distributor. So why would I pay the distributor that percentage? So they started ordering the highly expensive items directly, and then they would call up the distributor to order, consumable low-value things like cotton, bandages, syringes, adult diapers, things like that. Now, obviously, on these smaller items, 5% of that item's price or whatever percentage they had is going to give a very small amount of revenue to Owens and Minor. And what ended up happening was Owens and Minor was making losses, and they were about to go out of business. Okay? So it was unsustainable. Now, if they do go out of business, it's going to affect the hospital as well, because they can't get small, frequent deliveries of all these hundreds of small items they use, right? If they're going to do an expensive surgery, yes, they can plan ahead, they can order directly from the manufacturer, but for these small everyday items, they would have to have inventory within the hospital sufficient to get big shipments from the manufacturer, otherwise they would need the distributor. So as a first step to build trust with the hospitals, Owens and Minor did an internal exercise to figure out what is the cost of each activity. If we give a frequent small delivery on an item about this much cost, how much does it cost us to provide that service? In accounting, you've probably heard about activity-based costing, where you try to figure out, okay, what's the cost of each activity in a company? So using that sort of system, they came up with, okay, which customer gives us enough demand and suitable demand that is profitable to serve them, which hospital does not. So which are our profitable customers, which are not our profitable customers, and then which activities cost how much. So if you are shipping something small and expensive, delivering to the hospital, is your cost 5% of that thing necessarily, or is it lower? It might be lower. And if you are giving them, frequent deliveries of syringes, adult diapers, your cost may be more than 5% of the price of that item. So you want to figure out what's the cost by SKU, by activity. Once they did that analysis, they went to the hospitals and said, okay, you're ordering these things from us. This is the true cost of that. If you are not willing to pay this true cost, we might go out of business, so we can't go on the old system anymore, right? Based on that, they were able to set up new contracts with the hospitals where they got paid differently. So if they were doing smaller frequent deliveries, they got a higher payment, versus if they did bigger infrequent deliveries, they got a lower payment. And then depending on the item, they were able to reduce the charge on small expensive items because it doesn't take much to store them and so forth, and maybe increase the charge on some of the other items. Hospitals were signed up for this as well, which is a little bit surprising. Why would hospitals sign up? Now, Owens and Minors, it makes sense for them, right? Because now they get the fair price from the hospitals. They can stay afloat. They're not going to be serving unprofitable customers, doing unprofitable deliveries. But why did hospitals sign up into this new system where depending on what they order and how frequently they order, the charge to the hospital will change? Before just a flat fee, right? So what's in it for the hospital? Well, the hospital realized that if these guys go out of business, for us to order directly from the manufacturer every single thing is going to be expensive. We don't have the setup to handle that, right? Two, they realized that with this variable pricing, right, before, imagine if a hospital ordered everything from Owens and Minor versus another hospital which only ordered really the cheap stuff from them, right? The hospital which ordered everything from Owens and Minor was subsidizing the other hospital who was not profitable, right? So profitable customers kind of cross-subsidize unprofitable customers, right? So now hospitals realize, well, we don't cross-subsidize other hospitals, we just pay exactly for what we need, and so we can manage our ordering better and see where it's profitable, order that, and where it's not profitable, not order that. So at least we know what's happening and we don't end up cross-subsidizing unprofitable hospitals. So hospitals also signed up for that. Owens and Minors did really well after that. The revenues went up because they could realign themselves towards SKUs and customers which are profitable, and discontinue items not profitable, discontinue customers which are not profitable. Right? It's actually very interesting. A lot of consulting companies have made a lot of money doing this sort of analysis for companies where they say which SKUs and which customers you should focus on and which you should not focus on. Because over time, a company can increase their product range too much, also have a lot of customers, and then they kind of say, okay, we're not going to lose a customer, we're going to drop an SKU, and we're going to continue serving everybody. Yeah. I mean, their laws vary, but if sometimes companies can just refuse service to you and just say, no, we're not going to serve you. So in that case, they just make your life tough till you kind of go away, right? So they can still get rid of you, but they can't just call up and say, okay, we're not going to serve you anymore. But yeah, exactly the point. So a lot of consulting companies have made a lot of money just helping companies identify, what customers are profitable and so forth. Now a lot of companies already have in-house expertise to do that, but this is something that can be useful, especially when you're aligning incentives, because if somebody is not very profitable, you want to see even if aligning incentives will help there or not. So let's do an example on the other side. So with the distributor with the customer, let's talk about the supply side, manufacturer versus suppliers. Okay. So if you are a manufacturer, often manufacturers who do outsourcing, subcontracting, they would have a list of pre-qualified suppliers where they visited the supplier, they've checked out their capabilities, their quality levels, and now they have a list of suppliers they regularly source from. Okay? But sometimes you have to go outside that list. Maybe you need additional capacity, demand is rising, maybe you're launching a lot of new products which these existing suppliers don't have the capability to produce, you need to get on new suppliers, things like that. Also, if you are just doing consumer goods or apparel or shoes, sometimes you have to go outside your supply network for similar reasons. Now, there is a problem of information asymmetry. You go to a supplier and they show you a very good prototype, but when the actual product comes, they skimp on quality or materials. Or they use child labor and it gets in the news and becomes a huge scandal for you because you contracted manufacturing to somebody who has sweatshops or child labor, things like that, right? So as a manufacturer, you have a risk of going to just anybody because you don't know exactly how they run their operations. There's also risk on the supplier side. If the supplier just accepts the contract from anybody, they could get a manufacturer or a company which misuses the contract. So for example, a lot of times the contract will say, if there's a lack of quality or some defect, they can return that to the supplier. And in case of Walmart, there'll be penalties for the supplier as well. Walmart is not going to pay for the return shipping. They're going to charge the supplier for all the costs incurred, things like that. Now imagine a company, they order 10 products from a supplier, and 3 of the 10 products don't sell very well. So they have extra stock. They could just send it back to the supplier, making a claim, a false claim, that these were not up to our quality standards, right? And send all the excess inventory back, and they would make a lot of money because they send all the excess inventory back, but the supplier would lose a lot of money. So the risk on the supplier side as well, whether this company is going to be, take the contract in its spirit, or are they going to misuse the contract and just reject our product for no reason. Okay? So in this case, this lack of trust can cause issues. Now, you can, if the supplier and manufacturer are in different countries, you can try to contract the risk out, but it can be difficult. And you can put a lot of legal language in the contract. If this happens, we can do this, we can do this. But if you're talking about 2, very separate companies, maybe one in Vietnam, one in Germany, it's going to be very hard for a German company to go to Vietnam and sue the supplier and recover their losses. Similarly, it's going to be very expensive for a Vietnamese company to go to Germany, and it's not that these lawsuits don't happen, it's just expensive and time consuming to do them, right? Even if you recover your losses 3 years down the line with a lot of legal fees, that's still a lot of money you have lost. Okay? So sometimes even contracts can't help us. Okay? So what do we do? In these examples, often we can resort to intermediaries, where the buying company trusts somebody, and so they can deal with them, and then the suppliers also trust the same intermediary and they can deal with them. Okay. Li and Fung is, I think they started in 1904 or something. It's a very old company based in Hong Kong, which basically specializes at that. They are an intermediary between people who want to buy apparel or shoes, things like that, and they have a network of suppliers all over Asia, where they know the supplier's capabilities, they know the supplier's costs, they know because they visit the suppliers, they've been working with them for many years. They have a code of ethics the suppliers have to follow, so they can guarantee that there will be no child labor, XYZ. And manufacturers can work with Li and Fung because they've been around for a long time. They have a reputation for delivering on their promises, and so these are often used to match companies who want to buy apparel with producers of apparel. Okay. Okay, so what solution we go to is going to vary by the situation, but as a general rule, if we can't observe the actions of other companies and we don't have information about what they do, there is a chance that they could act in a way which hurts our interest or the interest of the entire supply chain. And we can look at various means to fix that. We've seen some examples already. Now to get to contracts. Contracts are a very powerful way to fix incentives. Why? Because they affect how much is paid, when it's paid, to whom it's paid, right? And the monetary incentive is a very strong incentive for different players to behave in different ways. When we do use contracts, we have to, the assumption is that contracts are enforceable, right? And there are conditions for that. For a contract to be enforceable, whatever is contracted has to be observable. Somebody has to measure that, right, if this thing happened or not. And then there has to be a legal system in place where you can go for arbitration or a lawsuit or things like that, right? Which is where a lot of these international trade agreements come in. in addition to just specifying tariffs or no tariffs, a lot of these trade agreements also build mechanisms where you can enforce a contract with a company in a different country, right? So trade agreements, only a small part of them is about trade. A lot of the trade agreement is about these sorts of issues where how do you enforce a contract, what are some of the things one country can do, what they can't do, things like that. So we're going to look at two types of contracts which can solve some particular types of problems. Okay? Essentially the problem we talked about in the very beginning, which is that even if one party behaves honestly but they act in their own self-interest, that could still not be optimal for the entire supply chain and we could make more money. Okay? So contracts can be the invisible hand which guides all the players in the supply chain towards the best case results. So let's look at this example again. So this was the example we talked about in the beginning. You're a manufacturer, a retailer, manufacturing cost is 45 cents per piece. Manufacturer makes 35 cents a unit, sells it for 80 cents. Retailer buys it for 80 cents, sells it for $1. They make 20 cents a piece, okay? Which is about 20% of the sale price. So if the retailer is selling multiple items, one item gives them 20% of revenue as their gross margin, but they also sell other items which give them 40%. Okay? Which item do they want to sell more? Obviously the 40% item, right? So if they have limited shelf space, they're going to assign more shelf space to the item which has higher profit margin, right? If they're going to have working capital, some money to buy inventory, they want to buy the one with the 40% return more than they want to buy the 20% return. Okay? Even if they just sell one item, so there's no competition between different items they sell, even if they just sell one item. So think about a newspaper vendor which just sells one newspaper, and this is the pricing: sell a newspaper for $1, buy it for 80 cents. We know from operations management and supply chain management, the topics we have done before, about forecasting, inventory management, that your forecast is never going to be 100% accurate. There's some variability around the forecast. So if you forecast to sell 100 newspapers, but your forecast can be up to 20% wrong, right? If it's an item that gives you a lot of profit, you're going to order more than the forecast tells you. You're going to order above 100 because you don't want to have lost sales, right? But if the item doesn't give you a lot of money, you may order just what the forecast tells you or even below the forecast because you don't want to end up with excess inventories, right? In this case, if this was a newspaper, then what happens to unsold newspaper? You can't sell it in the future, you just throw it out. And so the 80 cents you spent to buy the extra copies, you just lost the 80 cents, right? So if extra newspaper that you don't sell costs you 80 cents and a lost sales only cost you 20 cents, you're going to be inclined more towards avoiding extra newspapers than avoiding lost sales, because lost sales are cheap compared to extra newspapers. Right? So how much does the retailer stock is going to be based on how much the retailer makes on each unit, which is the cost of a lost sales, versus how much money you lose for having too much stuff. So in this case, the retailer will not stock a lot of this product. Okay? Why is that problematic? Because if the retailer does not sell, nobody in the supply chain sells, right? We could push a lot of inventory to the retailer by selling to the retailer, but if the retailer does not sell that inventory, he's going to order less from us next time, and our sales will also drop. It's not possible that the retailer does not sell and everybody else keeps selling. And that's just not possible. Over time, it will adjust its demand to match the end user demand. If the retailer does sell something, then everybody in the supply chain makes money, because the retailer pays 80 cents to the manufacturer pays 45 cents in labor cost, wages, and raw material costs, so the raw material supplier gets money, so everybody gets paid if the retailer gets paid, right? Now, over the short term, this may not hold true. You sell a lot to the retailer, and then the retailer makes a loss, but over the long term, it would balance out, and it will stop ordering extra pieces and so forth. Okay. So, what happens if the manufacturer acquires the retailer? They become one company. Now, what's the profit margin on each unit? It has more than doubled, right? So you will stock more inventory because lost sales now are a lot more expensive for you. And you'll have a higher fill rate by stocking more inventory. You'll meet a bigger percentage of the demand, and you'll make more money. Okay. Now, short of acquiring the retailer, what else can we do here to get closer to the maximum profit possible versus this situation? That's what we're going to look at next. Because in many cases, it's not feasible to just have one vertically integrated supply chain, just have one company controlling everything. Okay? Think about it from the example of Apple selling iPhones in Best Buy. Let's say an iPhone sells for $500. Apple makes $250 on that sale because their cost is $250 to make an iPhone. If they give Best Buy 5% of the sales, so Best Buy gets $25, right? So $500 iPhone sells for, Best Buy gets $25, Apple gets $225 because $250 is the total profit on it, right? And then $250 is the cost. That's one channel. The other channel is Apple stores. If you sell, or you're online, or if you sell apple.com, you sell an iPhone, you keep all the $250 yourself as Apple, right? Now, Best Buy has limited retail shelf space in their stores. When they look at an iPhone, they say, if I sell it, I get $25. So they're going to allocate their effort and shelf space according to a $25 margin. If Apple only sold through Best Buy, they would make much less money because Best Buy is not going to spend a lot of effort pushing a product that gives them $25. Right? Is that obvious to everybody? Great. Right? So if Apple could only sell through Best Buy and they only gave them 5% of the sales, the whole supply chain would make less money than it could because the retailer, the product is not worth much to the retailer, and the retailer sales is what matter. Right? So in the end of the day, all the back-end stages of the supply chain, all of them don't make a lot of money because for the retailer it's just a $25 worth thing, and the retailer is not going to sell much of it. So what can Apple do to increase sales through the Best Buy channel where they can make all the money they could make? That's what we're going to look at next. Now, a couple of things you need to remember. This problem will be severe if the retailer margin is less than a manufacturer margin. Okay? If retailer has most of the margins, if Best Buy was keeping most of the $250 and Apple was only getting a few dollars, Best Buy would give this product a lot of effort, a lot of inventory, a lot of visibility, because it will be a very profitable product for them. And then the profits made would be close to the maximum profits possible. It's just Best Buy would get to keep most of them, right? So the problem basically occurs when the last stage in the supply chain, their margin is small compared to the previous stages. They're going to manage everything, inventory, service levels, based on the small margin, and everybody's going to make less money. Okay? So if I give you an question on the exam saying this particular product, this is how much money the retailer makes, this is how much money the manufacturer makes, and the retailer is making a lot less money than the manufacturer per unit, you should immediately think, okay, if they do nothing out of the normal setup, the whole supply chain is going to be suboptimal because the retailer is not going to stock enough to avoid lost sales, because for the retailer it's a low margin product, right? Okay. We're going to look at, there are more than two solutions to this. We're going to look at two solutions. One is called a revenue sharing contract. One is called a buyback contract, where we work with the retailer as manufacturer to give some incentive to the retailer to stock more and sell more. Okay? Now, both of these contracts can be set up or fine-tuned so that the amount of money, the total amount of money we make will grow, and then this pool of money can be split equally, or manufacturer can keep more of it. We can fine-tune these contracts however we want, how we want to split the pie. So there's multiple ways we can still split the pie. But the point is that we can make more total money, and then we can split the pie so both of us make more money. Or, obviously if nobody's going to agree to a contract where they make less money than without the contract, so you're going to have to give some of that bigger pie to the retailer as well. Okay? So revenue sharing works this way. The manufacturer tells the retailer, I'm going to give you a very low price, okay? Maybe I'm just going to sell it to you at cost, no markup. But so that way, because you're buying it at a much lower cost and you're selling it at the same price, your margins grow, right? So you make more per unit. But I want you to compensate me. Whenever you sell a unit, you give me a percentage of your revenue, because I'm not making any money on the regular sales to you. I just sell you at cost. But when you make the final sales, you give me a percentage of the revenue. And that's the money I will make. That's how revenue sharing works. So in our example with the newspaper, the manufacturer could say, okay, I'm going to sell you the newspaper for 45 cents. That's my cost. But you give me 30% of your revenue or something like that. What that does to the retailer is, for the retailer, this suddenly becomes a high margin product now. And the retailer will give it the attention and the inventory it needs to sell as much as it can, and then they will share the revenue with the manufacturer. Buyback doesn't affect the initial sale to the retailer. All it does is it says, if you have extra inventory, I will take it off your hands for this much money. So I'll buy it back from you. What this does is the retailer now says, I can have a high amount of inventory, because if I have too much inventory, I don't have to write it off. I can just sell it back, right? Because before, extra newspapers were wasted, 80 cents lost by the retailer. Now extra newspapers are sold back for 60 cents, so only 20 cents are wasted on extra newspapers. So it reduces the cost of too much inventory. Okay, so let's look at how these things work in Excel. Now I've uploaded the file so you can download it and kind of follow along. And I'm going to show you how we can analyze these sorts of things. So we're first going to build a model for the traditional setup, and then we'll go to how do we do revenue sharing and buyback. So we have a retail price, we have a wholesale price, which is the price the retailer pays, and the manufacturing cost. Difference between these two is how much money retailer makes per unit. Difference between these two is how much money the manufacturer makes each unit. Okay? Now to see what's going to happen, we have two variables which impact the profit each of these players makes. The first variable is what's the demand. Okay? So you have a forecast of demand. You can say my forecast is normally distributed, average sales 150. So you can make different values of demand and assign them probabilities, right? Or you can have uniform demand. Whatever your demand distribution is, you can model it approximately by putting in the possible values of demand and the associated probabilities. Okay? So in our case, what does this demand distribution look like to you? What's happening to the probability as for different demand levels is the same. So it's a flat distribution. Between 100 to 200, any demand is equally likely. Okay? But I'm not going 100, 101, 102. I could go that. I'll just have a lot more columns. So whatever accuracy you want, you can have that many columns. You can go 100, 120, 140. You can go 100, 101, 102, however you want to go up. But for each level of demand, I have an associated probability. That's my first variable. The second variable is the decision the retailer makes how much inventory to carry. So that's going to be between 100 and 200. This is the minimum demand. You don't want to have inventory below the minimum demand, and you don't want to have inventory above the maximum demand. Once I know the inventory I have and I know the demand I have, I can compute the revenue retailer will make. How? Well, if the inventory is less than the demand, we will sell the inventory part only, right? So you take the minimum of these two values, multiplied by $1, so we make $100 in revenue, right? Similarly, let's look here. If our inventory was 120 and demand was 100, we still make only $100. Why? Because we can't sell the 20 extra, right? So for each case of demand and inventory, it should be relatively straightforward to figure out how much revenue there will be. Okay. So let's do another example. Let's say demand is 120, inventory is 110. How much do we sell? 110, right? You can't sell more than you have in stock. Okay? Assuming customer is not willing to wait, right? If customer is willing to wait, then this might not apply, and then you can get more stock later on, right? So we can figure out how much revenue we're going to have for each case. Now, on average or long term, how do I know that with an inventory level of 100, what's going to be my revenue? Because I know for each demand level what my revenue is going to be. I know the probability of the demand level. So you can figure out the average revenue you will get with the inventory level of 100 by multiplying the probabilities by the revenue and adding them up. Because if you have a 50% chance of making this much money, 50% chance of making this much money, on average, you'll make the average of these two, right? Same idea. You know the probabilities, you know how much money you'll make in each situation. You can do multiply the probabilities by the money, add them up to get how much revenue you will make. So we can this times this plus this times this plus this times this will give us that. Same thing all the way down. We can do for each inventory level, we can figure out how much money we will make. Okay. Now we also have to pay the manufacturer. Well, how much do we pay the manufacturer? That's the inventory level. That's how much we bought from the manufacturer times 80 cents. Okay. So for each level of inventory, I have a different payment to make to the manufacturer. If I stock this much, I pay this much times 0.80. If I stock this much, I pay this much times 0.8, right? So for each inventory level, I have my expected revenue, I have my cost. Revenue minus cost gives me my profit. Okay. So that's how this column is computed. It just takes the red numbers, multiplies them by the blue numbers and adds them up to get expected revenue. Then it subtracts 0.8 times how much we ordered, which is the cost. The cost is nothing expected or probabilistic about the cost. The cost is fixed because I decide my cost, because I decide how much to order as a retailer. All right, if you order more, it costs you more. Order less, costs you less. Now if you look at the retailer profit, they go from 20 down to minus 10. The maximum profit we get for the retailer is when you order 120 units of inventory. So if the retailer works by itself based on self-interest, the retailer is going to order 120 units each day, make $21.3 on average each day, right? And why? Because if you order any less, you make less money. You order any more, you make less money. So you're going to order 120. If you look at 120, the manufacturer's calculation is really easy. It's just going to be the 120 times 0.8, that's manufacturer's revenue, and minus 120 times 0.45, manufacturer's cost. So manufacturer's profit is 42, total profit is 63. If the manufacturer could decide how much to stock, you can see that manufacturer has no risk of lost sales. So manufacturer just wants to push as much as they want. They will make most profit if they push 200 newspapers out, right? If you look at the total profit in the supply chain here, you can see that the highest value is 68.9, which occurs if you order 150 or 160. So if this was one company, they would actually publish 150 or 160 newspapers every day, or stock that many, and they would make $68.9, right? Right now they're making less than 68.9. Okay, so let's see. So we're going to do the same calculation again, except this time we're going to say what percentage of the revenue does the retailer keep. So we start with a high percentage, 95%, and we change the wholesale price down, so there's no margin for the manufacturer. They sell at cost. The only money they make is from the revenue sharing. Okay, exact same computations happen. Okay, the retailer makes this much revenue, but now the thing that happens to their cost is that in addition to paying the manufacturer the wholesale price, they also have to pay the manufacturer 5%, so they only keep 95% of the revenue. So the revenue falls a little bit because of this 95%, the costs stay the same. we can calculate the retailer profit and the manufacturer profit. Okay. Okay. And we can calculate the total supply chain profit. Now, if we keep 95% of the revenue, we can see the manufacturer makes peanuts and the retailer keeps most of the profit. Why? Because the manufacturer gets nothing. There's zero gross margin for the manufacturer. They only get 5% of sales. But I put 95% here. We can change this number and see what happens. So you can play around, right? You can change this number to 0.8, and you'll see the manufacturer starts making more money. Okay. Let's go back to 0.95 because I'm going to show you a little clever trick. So here I just put in some functions to pull out the maximum profit for the retailer, because the retailer still gets to decide how much to order. Right? We can't force them to stock more or stock less. Okay, and so in this case, retailer is going to stock this level right here, which gives the maximum retailer profits. Inventory is going to be 150. Retailer will make 62, manufacturer will make 7, and they are making 100% of the maximum supply chain profit possible. But the manufacturer is making peanuts. Then I tell Excel to vary this percentage from 95% down to 10%. You could go down whatever you want. And for each percentage, I save, okay, how much inventory level they're going to keep, what's going to be the total supply chain profit, okay, what's the retailer profit, what's the manufacturer profit, and what percentage of the total profit they've captured together. Okay. So looking at this table, okay, the retailer wants to be up here. The retailer will say, yes, give me the low price. I'm going to keep 95% of the revenue. This is perfect for me. Right? Where does the manufacturer want to be? The manufacturer maximizes their profit here when the retailer gives all the revenue back to the manufacturer, but retailer is in loss. Okay? So obviously there's going to be a negotiation between the two, and they're going to end somewhere in the middle. If you look somewhere around here, they've captured most of the supply chain profit, and they're making more than they were making individually before. Because before, when they don't do any revenue sharing, retailer was making 21, this guy was making 40 or 42. So with revenue sharing, they can both make more money. Okay? And capture 95% of the total profit possible. They can capture more, but if you go to capturing more, the manufacturer makes peanuts, so they're not going to go there. He's not going to agree to that, right? We do the same thing with a buyback contract. Okay. With the buyback, the calculation has two steps, because first you figure out how much revenue the retailer will make. Then you figure out, okay, what's the extra inventory the retailer has and how much money they'll make from buyback. Because now the retailer has two revenue streams. One is from the customer by selling the product. The second is selling excess stock back to the manufacturer. Okay. So you have buyback calculation to do as well, which is again really straightforward. You look at the difference between inventory and demand. If that difference is positive, you multiply that by the buyback price. Okay. If the inventory was less than demand, then there's no buyback. So you can see wherever inventory is less than demand, there's zero buyback. Wherever inventory is more than the demand, there is some buyback. Okay. And then you can do the same calculation. The retailer now makes two revenue streams. So you multiply each revenue stream by the probabilities. You subtract the cost. Okay. And you get retailer money, you get manufacturer money, you get total money. Now again, you can tell Excel to iterate over the buyback price and give us the different amounts of money they make and the total money they capture. You can see in this case, you can capture the total profit possible, and the retailer makes more than they were making individually. They were making 20, 22, 21, and the manufacturer was making 40 something. Because if you go back, okay, here, the 22 and 42 was what they make when they work independently without any collaboration. Okay, so they can make more than what they were making individually, capture all of the supply chain profit if we set the buyback price to $0.7. Okay, so both of them make more money, both of them are happy. Now how do I make this table? There are two ways to make this table. The first way is you just change this number, because everything is formula, so as you change this, all the numbers change and you just record it here. Okay, and that's not too bad. We have about 10, 12 rows, so you can just do it 10, 12 times. Okay. The other way that I'm going to show you which automates this is this. Let's delete the table. Okay, so you type in the values you want. So you type in 0.8, then I reduce it by 5%, and I just drag it down, and you can drag it down to 5% if you want. Okay, and then in the top row, you just save the output of the model that you want to save. So I would specify here, for example, inventory level, copy this cell here, copy that value. Supply chain profit, copy that value right here. Percentage of profit captured, which is the retailer profit, the total supply chain profit captured with this inventory level divided by the total supply chain profit, the maximum supply chain profit possible. Okay, because this inventory level is set by the retailer, and that's what you're gonna make versus the best that you could make. And then the retailer profit, and then the manufacturer profit. Then you select this whole table with all the empty rows, and you go to data, what if analysis, data table. Okay. Now data table, what it conceptually does is this. It says to Excel, I have some parameters which my model depends on. You're going to change one of these parameters and copy paste the output in a table for me, so I don't have to manually do that change. Okay. So how will the data table know what is the output? I copied the output values into the top cell, so it knows which cells have the output. That's these cells right here. The only thing I have to tell it now which is the input cell to change. So I'm going to say my input values are in a column, so go to column input cell, copy these values into this cell right here, and save the output. And fill out the whole table for you. Okay. Now, there's lots of tutorials online which do a much better job than me of explaining what a data table is. I've given you some links here. This is a very, very powerful tool. This is basically called what if analysis. This is what Excel was invented for. When Microsoft first made Excel, all these business people were saying we do a lot of what if analysis. What if this changes, this happens? We need a tool to do that, and that's what spreadsheets were for, right? So a very easy way. All of this computation you can do using calculus and math too. So you can mathematically see what's the optimal inventory level, what the retailer will order, what the manufacturer will order, what their expected profits are. But it'll take us 2 weeks to cover that math. We don't need that math because we can just do it in Excel with a very simple model, just using plus, minus, and data table in the same time it will take us to do the math formulas. Okay? So that is why I love this what if analysis tool, because you then don't have to remember any formulas ever again. You want to find the optimal ordering quantity, pick 10 different ordering quantities or 20 or 100, find the cost, build a model, find the cost, do a data table, plot it or see where the minimum cost is. That's your ordering quantity. And when inventory levels, any inventory calculation you can do using what if analysis. Right? Any demand distribution you can approximate, right? Because when you have different demand levels and different probabilities for each level, you can approximate any distribution. Demand is Poisson. Just pick 10 values of the Poisson distribution. At this value, this is the probability. This value, this is the probability. Demand is normal. Pick 10, 20 values to represent the normal distribution, right? Whatever distribution demand has, pick 10, 20, 50, whatever accuracy you want values, find their associated probabilities, put them in a row. That's it. For each demand level, pick your decision, find your profit. And then just run data table for different values of the input parameters, and you can find what's the optimal value for you, right? So if retailer and manufacturer were to do this computation, they would say revenue sharing in this way didn't work out very well because they make more money here actually. Well, between 0.65 and 0.6, they can both make more money, but just a little bit more than what they make individually. Because they make 22 and about 44 already. So they don't make a lot more with revenue sharing in this case. But if they go to buyback, right, they can both make lots of more money and capture all the money there is to capture, and then this would be like optimal for them to do this buyback contract. Retailers actually, if you have a perishable product, often do that. Let's say you come up with a new Halloween costume you think is going to be really popular this year based on whatever movies that have been released or something like that. And you want these retailers to carry your costume. Okay? Now, the retailers will say it's a high risk item because after Halloween, sales zero. Any extra pieces I have left over are a loss for me. So if you don't do any contract with the retailer, they're going to stock very less amount of that costume. And if the costume becomes a hit, your sales, you will have a hard cap. Your sales can't go above that because there's no more inventory to sell. So if you offer a buyback to a retailer, you reduce the risk for the retailer. You say, okay, stock a lot of my costume, you don't sell it, I will take it back, right? That way the retailer will stock extra, and then if the demand is there, you will both make a lot of money, right? So these contracts are actually used between manufacturers and retailers very frequently. Okay. Now, if you have any questions about the Excel details, you can see me in the office hours, before class, after class. I can go over every single formula. The idea is really simple. You have one variable going across the columns and other values of a second variable going across the rows. For each value of demand and inventory, you calculate what's the revenue, what's the profit, what's the loss. It's simple calculations, multiplying, the quantities by prices, subtracting costs, straightforward calculations. So there's no complicated square roots, anything else in there. And then you just tell Excel to change the input parameter across this range and copy paste all the output for you in a nice table, and you pick the value which works for you, right? So you can work on, look at this. Now you don't have to do this for the case on Thursday. The case on Thursday is a revenue sharing type of case where you can do a revenue sharing contract. But you don't have to do this analysis. Why? Because the case doesn't tell you come up with the optimal contract. The contract is already being offered, it's already in the case. This is the contract on offer. So you don't have to do any of this analysis for the case. What you have to do as a retailer is to see, does the contract work for you as a retailer or not? So you have to evaluate the contract, see if it's worth it for you to go for it or not. Okay. Okay, so I think we're kind of out of time for the team meeting.